And thank you for tuning in to our Climate Action for Associations Roundtable event. I'm Ali Heppenstall, Managing Director of B2B. Please feel free to use the Q&A function, as we hope to have time for questions throughout and at the end. And if we don't, then we'll follow up with further information, answers and content. This is the first of many Climate Action for Association roundtables that we're planning on the role of industry and professional membership organisations in the acceleration to net zero economy. But what makes this roundtable even more special, as this event is part of the biggest climate summit taking place on Earth this year, Climate Week 2020 NYC, which is run by our wonderful client, the Climate Group. And I'm thrilled that Mike Peirce, Director of Corporate Partnerships at the Climate Group, is co-chairing this roundtable today. At B2B, we understand and have experienced firsthand by working with so many associations the influence and power membership organisations have on the industries and professions they represent. We all know that business and industry contribute the majority of carbon emissions globally, and that around the world, organisations large and small are being called on in a state of emergency to introduce sustainable business models, reduce energy consumption, implement renewable practices, change their supply processes, and invest in greener solutions. Many organisations are working hard to adapt and not only committing to meeting these targets, but some are already well on their way to achieving them, as we've seen by many of the announcements over the last few days during Climate Week. But only some, and the uptake, adoption and adaptation is not happening quickly enough. Many businesses still do not understand the economic opportunities associated and are struggling with the business case for change. At B2B, we firmly believe that professional and trade associations as umbrella groups have the opportunity and authority to take a much stronger climate leadership role and proactively drive action of and for the industries and sectors they represent. We see a huge collective climate action responsibility and opportunity, and we would go as far as saying industry membership organisations have a duty of care in this area. At B2B, we're already working really hard with a number of bodies on their own climate sustainability programs, including research, learning, skills increase, campaigns and content, and are seeing common questions on how to take action, how to instigate practical change and implementation. So this roundtable is a taster. It's a starter for 10 to hear directly from a range of predominantly business finance related bodies today, what they see the role of associations is in the acceleration to net zero. Co-chairing with myself is fantastic. We have Mike Peirce, the Director of Corporate Partnerships at the Climate Group. Mike leads Climate Group's portfolio of global campaigns that are designed to secure climate commitment and action from the world's most influential companies. Jonathan Labrey is Chief Strategy Officer of the International Integrated Reporting Council, and Jonathan's a global expert in corporate governance and reporting with over 16 years experience in the accountancy profession, regulation and corporate reporting. Sharon Machado is Portfolio Head of Business Reporting at ACCA. Sharon provides holistic representation of business reporting function and manages the team of experts at in ACCA's Thought Leadership and Policy departments, and works in financially integrated reporting, audit, tax and business law. Dr. Adam Marshall, Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce. Adam's principal role is to represent and champion the interests of accredited chambers of commerce and their tens of thousands of business members, covering every size and sector of business and making over 5 million, employing over 5 million people in the UK. And lastly, John Wood, Interim CEO, Institute of Internal Auditors. John has a mix of third sector and commercial experience, taking leadership roles in packaging and point of sale. He's also held various operational, technical and commercial roles in metals and chemical sectors. So I wanted to kick off, Mike, by starting a conversation, a discussion between the group of what does climate leadership in this context really mean?
Great, thanks, Ali. And it's super to be here with B2B as part of this event and as part of Climate Week. And I suppose I would note that at the start of, well, I guess in March time this year, when we wondered with COVID, how things would plan out. We were rather nervous about what would happen with Climate Week and how the business community would want to be involved. And it's quite extraordinary that we now have more than 450 events happening globally as part of Climate Week NYC, really showing the appetite, albeit in very difficult times, to be able to address and look at and explore these issues. It's also been interesting that as part of this time, people are still looking to make very ambitious commitments about the direction they can go in. Tesco this week have joined the EV100 initiative, which is about a commitment to have an all-electric fleet by 2030 and install charging infrastructure across all of their key stores in the UK. PepsiCo have gone 100% renewable electric. Google have not just talked about 100% clean energy all the time use, but how they tackle what they call their carbon legacy, and indeed how they engage with 1 billion consumers of their products to think about climate issues. And then we've had more companies who are looking at smart energy and buildings signing up to our EP100 initiative. So we are seeing a lot of commitment and ambition amongst companies still. But I guess it's an interesting question about what that leadership looks like, because clearly it's not just about saying we're going to do X. And there's an important report which has come out today from the Women Business Coalition, of which the Climate Group is a part, a number of business NGOs. And they talk about climate leadership now. And I guess that ambition is at the core of that, but there's a lot of talk also there around action. How do you get climate to be part of the core strategy and the core processes of innovation within organisations? And then also advocacy. What's the part of businesses in being able to engage with the policy environment to enable policies that support a faster and more ambitious action on climate? And so I think those aspects of ambition, action, advocacy are the core of what we can imagine of serious progress on climate leadership would look like. And I'm obviously very interested in the conversation today and seeing what does that mean for the membership associations and organisations who've got networks of companies who've got a great opportunity to move those there. And I suppose I'd say finally, as my sort of lead into this and really looking now forward to hear from the colleagues around the roundtable, is clearly we do have a different sorts of professional and sectoral bodies here today, from those which are networks of networks to those that have got professional members and professions within there. And I'm sure we'll hear slightly different angles on this from that different background. So what I'd like to do is, in a sense, start to hear how the colleagues in the roundtable are hearing about these issues from their members. What are they? How is this landing on their plates at the moment? And perhaps John, starting with you from the Institute of Internal Auditors. I'm conscious that the organisation has done some recent research with its members, and it'd be great to hear what are we hearing from this group of professions about how climate matters now, how it will look to matter to them going forward.
Well, thank you, Mike. Yes, absolutely. Leadership starts off not just by telling members what you want them to hear. Leadership starts by listening to your members, and part of that is doing surveys. So clearly, yes, climate change should be viewed as a strategic business critical risk, and we want to see the internal audit profession do far more on this risk area. And we know that climate change is the most dynamic and emerging risk that is quickly moving up internal audit's agenda. We've recently carried out our Risk in Focus 2021 survey, and it's an annual survey. In the last year, we've surveyed over 570 chief audit executives, which we've carried out this survey in partnership with 10 other European institutes. And each year we look at the top 10 risks faced by organisations in the year ahead. Now, 3 years ago, 8% of the chief audit executives cited climate change as one of their company's top 5 risks. The result doubled to 14% in Risk in Focus last year, and then this year it's come up to 22%. So that is very, very encouraging. And we would expect this direction of travel to continue. And in fact, no other risk area is expected to gain more priority over this period. But another thing about the survey, there seems to be a disconnect between what organisations increasingly identify as a big risk and the time and resources that internal audit professionals spend on climate change risks. Indeed, the survey revealed that only 6% of internal audit chiefs cite climate change as one of the top areas they spend most time and effort on, and we'd clearly like this to change. Back to your theme of leadership. So there's a real challenge for us and an opportunity for us as a professional membership organisation to lead and guide the internal audit profession on the climate change challenge, position ourselves as a thought leader, as well as equip the internal audit profession with the knowledge and skills they need to provide high quality independent assurance on climate change risks to boards and executive management. And we believe that it's vital that the internal audit professionals dedicate more time and resource to provide independent assurance on this business critical risk. So thank you very much, Mike.
That's great, John, and I'll look forward to hearing a little bit more later on about the way in which, more specifically, the Institute is looking to bridge that gap, as you say, between the scale of risk that members are perceiving and the actual level of action now, which is clearly a critical one to come across. Adam, we've obviously got a membership where I know obviously it may be worth mentioning this around the local chambers and then the 1,000 of members sitting within that. It'd be really interesting to hear what you're hearing about climate, if at all. I mean, is it mentioned? Is it a priority? Is it frankly a distraction at the moment? What's the narrative that you're hearing across this very large number of organisations?
Well, Mike, it's an interesting moment in time, I think, to have this discussion, given that there are a few other things going on which do take precedence in many businesses' minds. Dealing with the basics of survival during the pandemic, for example, is preoccupying so many. And equally, you've got those who are preoccupied with dealing with the Brexit transition as well. So there are other things on many businesses' plates. I think it's important to recognize that. I guess I identify sort of three trends. You've got first, the committed, those who care a great deal, who have already started doing a lot in their businesses and who are absolutely committed to doing more. And that ranges from some of the very smallest right up through to some of the very biggest that are out there. The second group I'd identify are the opportunistic. So there are those who are using the moment that we're in and some of the change that's going on as an opportunity to reevaluate their footprint, think about what they could do differently. Many of those will be driven by cost considerations, but they see an opportunity to bring both cost and environmental responsibility together at the same time. And the third group, quite frankly, are those who I would say are drowning at the moment. They're not drowning because of rising sea levels per se just yet, but they are drowning because their businesses are simply coping with so many things at this point in time, and they feel they don't have the luxury to look at this particular set of issues and to take action on it. It feels like something that they would do at a benign moment in time rather than a moment of crisis. And I'd suggest that that third group, that last group, is perhaps the hardest to reach and the one that's going to take the most time to come to the table.
I know these are crude characterizations, Adam, but how big is that third group amongst your members?
Well, I think not just amongst my membership, but probably in the UK business community at large, I think it's still a very large group out there. Those who are preoccupied with survival, with cash flow, with the fact that demand has fallen off a cliff in their particular sector over recent months. It's a significant proportion of businesses. And I think we have to acknowledge sometimes that when we have these conversations about this incredibly important set of issues, sometimes it's an in-group conversation. And we talk to those who equally like us are motivated about it. And one of the most important things that we can do is to widen that circle and help more come into it.
Yeah. No, I'm absolutely with you on that. We ran a survey of 100 of the members who've signed up to our campaigns this year and got a really positive result of how they were expecting to be able to continue their commitment to sustainability throughout COVID. And good, absolutely it is good that they're seeing that. But to your point, there's the thing, how do we connect that commitment and help their relationship with the much wider business community is going to be vital given the scale of the SME sector and the wider business community. Great. Adam, we'll look forward to hearing more on that shortly. Jonathan, perhaps it'd be interesting to hear a little bit about your network, where again, I guess we have a group that as part of the business network have expressed an interest in taking action on sustainability issues and climate issues. How have those issues appeared to you, and how do you talk about the business case with them to encourage further work?
Thank you, Mike. Well, we see ourselves really as being part of the transition where climate risk will just become integrated within the performance management of organisations. So over time, we see it just being as natural. Mark Carney said yesterday, it should be as natural in the future for financial controllers and CFOs to take account of climate risk as it is for them to take account today of interest rate fluctuations and matters that are regarded as financial, because we know that over time, things that are considered as climate risk or non-financial risk become financial risks in the future. The World Economic Forum's done a lot of work over the years looking at global risks, seeing the transition over the last 10 years where the main risks facing a company were financial in nature. Today, nearly all the risks facing business are non-financial. And one of the challenges highlighted in a recent PwC survey is CEOs know that in order to manage businesses today, they need different sets of data, looking at employment, looking at natural capital risks and so on. But they simply don't have access to the data to manage their businesses in a way that they know is the way to manage a business in order to reinforce business model resilience. And I think one of the connections between climate change and the COVID crisis is that question of business model resilience and thinking about performance in an entirely different way. We're very used to thinking about performance of business just in terms of short-term financial performance, and that's absolutely critical. Of course, cash flow is absolutely critical, but actually when you're facing a tsunami of different challenges in the short term, you do need, in order to attract the best people, the best talent, in order to attract capital investment, you do need to be able to explain what your purpose is fundamentally and how you're going to navigate those immediate challenges to create value over time. And that means creating value for different stakeholders and across the different dimensions of value. So we've created a framework that companies are using now that helps them to really orient their business to manage those different drivers of value that we call the capital, so that they can explain how they're creating value in the future and what the business case for that. And all the evidence, whether it's empirical evidence or academic evidence, shows that companies that are managing themselves in this way are benefiting from a lower cost of capital, they're listed higher share price performance, and they're also attracting longer term investors and more dedicated investors as well. So they're just becoming more stable, as well as being able to contribute to sustainable development.
That's great. That's very helpful. And I always think one of the things is people often worry it's like the management time that's taken to think about environmental issues, and so almost like it's an opportunity, it's a cost just to be thinking about it rather than something else. Whereas if you actually bring that into the core of what organisational planning and strategy is, then in a way it's not something else you've got to worry about, but actually that's what your plan of what you're doing is. Good. Sharon, from the ACCA, conscious that this is an organisation for a long time has been thinking about the role of the accountancy profession and the role of accountants, what it means to be a professional, and how sustainability and climate issues are important. What's the dynamic in recent times from your members about these issues? Again, is it going up the priority? Are we in the same place we always were?
I think, firstly, actually, thank you for inviting me to this discussion. It's great to be part of something that we need to be acting on quickly with momentum. And actually our members are feeling that too. So we have a report that's due out in October called Mainstreaming Impact, and it surveyed our members and actually sings true to some of the facts that we've heard from the other panelists today. 90% of those surveyed were saying we need to be doing more in the environmental sustainability space and positive impact on society. And the finance function of those surveys, 95% of them were saying, well, the finance function, accountants as part of that, have a lead and support role. And that ties very much into the business model resilience that I think Jonathan just alluded to, where you've got the sort of top 215 companies in a recent CDP survey that was, together are worth 17 trillion, saying that actually the cost of climate has an impact potentially of 1 trillion. Risk management is going to be incredibly important to them. And back to Adam's point around COVID and Brexit actually, but COVID, it has heightened that importance. But what we have seen, and I think it's in our COVID-19 Road to Recovery report, is that investment in this area is stalled potentially by some, but it's not cancelled, so it is there, but we need to get that moving. Topics of importance really for our members, what they're telling us is a couple of things. One around understanding. So thinking about understanding dependency and impact in a reliable way. So the data really needs to be there for them to do that. Help in guiding strategy and business model transformation. So potentially around the 4 R's of restore, remove, reduce, and the big one, innovation, reimagine what success looks like. And that needs support with stakeholder relationship management to make that happen. Balancing the need for returns that shareholders require. That's not going to go away, but it needs to be delivered in a different way, and looking at multi-capital value creation that Jonathan was very much talking about. And SMEs are a really important part of this, because whilst there's technical guidance that's wanted around measurement, accounting, reporting, and that all importance of assurance, a key role for public interest and value, one size doesn't fit all, and SMEs will probably need something a bit more tailored towards their particular circumstances and their available resources. And I think that's a big role for all of us in this group.
Great, thank you, Sharon, on that. And I guess I was interested, particularly where you started talking about the finance function has a lead role, because I guess maybe this is something that people haven't always seen as it being the domain of critical importance for that group. And John, I suppose I was interested to know whether from a parallel or connected function around audit, are there particular topics or themes that you're seeing as important to the group of internal auditors there, that they're looking to see and they're bringing to the fore now? I mean, you mentioned risk earlier on. Does that capture it, or you say a bit more about that?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, clearly the top risks that we're looking at the moment are cybersecurity is a key risk. I mean, clearly the disruption as a whole, COVID has been a risk, Brexit is going up the organised, but climate has been a very consistent one over the last few years, and as I said earlier, is actually going up and quite right too. So yes.
Great. Jonathan, from your side, are there any particular topics that within that area that you're seeing particularly becoming people paying attention to now, or wanting to know more about now, perhaps in COVID times, that seem more relevant, have heightened up the agenda?
Well, I think what's interesting is people are looking for, quite naturally, they're looking for crisis management tools and ways of connecting with their stakeholders. And we had a conversation recently with the CFO of Petronas Gas in Malaysia, one of the big companies in Southeast Asia. And she was telling us they've been adopting integrated reporting for several years, and they saw integrated reporting as a tool for managing the business over the longer term. But they found that it's been great during the COVID crisis because they understand who their stakeholders are, who their key stakeholders are, and they also understand what those stakeholders want from the business. So at a time of crisis, instead of going internally, they were able to communicate very, very quickly with their different stakeholders in ways that they knew that they wanted to be communicated with. And that just helped to build trust or retain trust in the business with their key stakeholders, investors, customers, etc., at that key moment. So I think what people are looking for isn't just reporting. I mean, we're in the corporate reporting world, but I think they're also looking for governance tools as well, tools that they can use that are going to respond to the multiple challenges that businesses face today, so that they're not just playing a whack-a-mole strategy of kind of whacking every crisis as it hits them, but they've actually got a long-term story to tell. That every report that they issue, every annual report, doesn't just look like a report every year from a completely different business that isn't connected, but actually they're able to tell a compelling story, a narrative of their business over time that helps to build trust with stakeholders, because we know, particularly from millennial customers, that they're looking, that they have it's trust generally of business, but there's going to be the biggest transfer of wealth from one generation to the next over the next 25 years. And there's a Deloitte survey every year that comes out looking at what the attitudes of millennials. They want to invest in and be consumers of companies that are purpose-led, that have this kind of long-term approach, that embed climate change within their kind of core philosophy and core strategy. I think for businesses that are looking to retain value over the long term, this isn't an issue that is a kind of nice to have. It's an issue that is absolutely essential to them building a strong and sustainable business over the longer term.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. Great, so look, I think we've got a reasonable feel of how this dynamic is playing out in your different member organisations and conversations. Naturally now it'd be nice to move forward to some of the ways in which you're thinking organisationally as how you respond to these opportunities and challenges. I'm going to mention, in fact, we've got a very interesting question from Ian Riley from the global cement industry, which I don't expect all of you to answer directly, but I'm going to mention now because it may play into some of the conversations or comments you want to come back on this. But he talks about the importance of the regulatory environment, and perhaps in particularly a higher carbon price, in enabling the cement industry to be able to move further and faster, because without that the economic incentive is just not there to do that. And so one of the questions that fitting in with my model earlier on of ambition, action and advocacy is the part that associations can play in shaping the wider policy environment. So I don't want that to dominate your answers, but if you have that in mind, you may want to reflect on that role of regulation in how you respond. So Adam, this membership, as you say, many of whom are swimming, some of whom are sort of trying to make this work in an opportunistic fashion. What are the things that you've seen that you can do, and through your networks that you can do, to be able to support those members in a useful way, either to help those who are drowning or to enable the opportunistic to move forward in a more systematic way?
Well, Mike, I think the first thing is to speak to them in their own language. And with the greatest respect to many colleagues on the call, a lot of the governance toolkits that we all care about and use is esoteric to a lot of businesses out there, and not something that many of them have either the time nor the wherewithal to engage with, given the other priorities they have on. If we start talking to them about efficiency, if we start talking to them about cost reduction, if we start talking to them, as several colleagues have mentioned, about the potential behavior of their consumers, particularly those who are more conscious, if we start asking them whether they think they'll still have a license to operate in the coming years and legitimacy as a business, all of a sudden they start to sit up, they pay more attention, and they engage with the issues far more. So I suppose the first thing I'd say is language matters, tone matters, and the way the agenda is communicated matters. The second thing is that, related to that, giving them practical things that they can do is extraordinarily helpful. This is where the governance toolkit that was referred to by several colleagues needs to be complemented by a practical toolkit. And there I mean things about, how do you decarbonize your energy supply? How do you adjust your premises? How do you implement flexible and agile working practices that lower your carbon footprint? What incentives can you give to your employees for changes to their behavior and practice? It's some of the micro level stuff where small changes add up to a big difference, but where a lot of firms need that help and support. So, I'd really advocate for there to be both a governance level, theoretical, strategic discussion on some of these matters, and a very nitty-gritty practical one to go alongside it to enable all companies to take part in some way.
Yeah, I'm completely with you on that practical aspect of it. There's I'm in fear of more jargon, but there's an SME Hub which is being launched this week at Climate Week, which is an opportunity to look at how do we build those resources out and support many smaller organisations in the work. But if that doesn't really drive home the sort of, as you say, really practical things that people can do that make sense in their particular sector and environment, that will surely fall flat. So I think it's a very good space that needs to be supported, but clearly there's a lot more investment needed to be able to make that work well for many people. Maybe Sharon, what do you see as the big developments that will support your network in better addressing climate? Is it more capacity building, more tools, more awareness raising? What sort of things are you looking at to be able to enable the membership to deliver more?
I think playing to actually Adam's point is a really important one. So here, what we really need to be doing is creating, but in part, those toolkits, because that's what's being asked for. So taking the plethora of guidance and bring it down to practical application and looking at the opportunity to work to learning from others. So there are large organisations, for example, that are out there that have great sustainability functions, and they're making their information publicly available. They're not using sustainability to be their USP, in fact. And because it's not something that you can deliver on your own, you know, small business, large business will all be part of that supply chain. So it's important for them to get it right. And so around that, it's creating the implementation guidance, looking at what the large organisations are doing, but with a lens of caution, because they may be taking their data in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, monetising it in a way that allows comparability for their capital expenditure rating. But if they're using rates, for example, that are 10 years old, well, that's fine for their internal capital expenditure decision making. It might not be fine for a smaller entity that's using that guidance to perhaps think about, well, what is the cost, going to Adam's point, of restoring negative impact in terms of what they're doing. I think the other thing that's really important for ACCA, and I'm not going to talk about cement, which was the question that came up, but was the role of our profession in taking that regulatory discussion forward. You know, ACCA is great in the fact that we've got our 750,000 membership in 180 countries around the world. So they feed us and we feed them in terms of shaping policy at a global but also a local level, so that it's appropriate for the industries and for the industries in those various geographies. But then distilling that down through our forums in a way that makes sense for them. So taking those macro issues, whether they come out of the Green Deal, from Europe, and thinking about, okay, so what does this mean for smaller businesses or specialist businesses? And we do that through our various forums and our networks as a way forward. But the point around taxonomy is really, really important here, making sure that we're using a language that comes from science but brings finance together with it.
Yeah, Sharon, I really appreciate that point, and I genuinely, why I've been particularly interested in this conversation today is that, or one of the aspects of this is the opportunity that we have with large international professional associations like yours, where you have people working across the world and the contribution they can make within those local business communities, but perhaps also just in their sense as leaders within the various areas they work. You know, accountants are, you know, chairs of school PTFAs and chairs of school governors, other associations and places where actually that expertise can make an incredible difference to what's done. And so seeing people as leaders in their different communities as well as their formal roles can be quite an important part of that. Maybe Sharon, just there's a follow-up question here, perhaps also from one of the person online, Kevin Bader, who's asking about how associations, or whether associations, have to demonstrate real evidence of what they're doing themselves in order to be able to lead, guide and encourage members. Now, I guess one of the great things you can do is to encourage your members, because that's where the real power lies. But does that ring true for how ACCA corporately sees what it needs to do on climate issues to seem to be credible?
I think the answer to that is definitely yes. I think a big role, you know, if we're going to act in the public interest, which therefore includes, you know, being careful about how we manage climate, then we need to lead by example. And there are three things I think that are important here that ACCA is very much committed to, and I'm certain that all professional bodies in their own way will be doing the same. And it's around, so we have signed up a commitment to the Green Finance Education Charter being one, and that puts us on a committed timescale to making change. So whether it is global delivery of our qualification by digital means, and therefore completely reducing our freight and print footprint as one example. The second point about bringing the SDGs, and I know I'm now going beyond climate, but bringing those into our decision making, so at a strategic level, and then filtering that all the way down. So we have been, you know, working with the IARC for many years, and, you know, integrated reporting is one thing, but I know that seems very, very true to the IARC, and as well to us, is that point about integrated thinking. So therefore it's taking that strategy, embedding it in, so I'm not going to use the word governance, I'm going to use the word culture, the culture of our organisation, and that filters down to every decision that's made throughout our organisation. And that are the types of stories that we would expect to have our members reflect in the organisations in which they work.
Great, thank you, Sharon. John, over to you to hear a bit more about the plans that the auditors are taking on this, that you're seeing that in your institute, the biggest gap or the biggest need that you think you need to help support.
That's a very good question, and I think we've already, in my first answer on risk in focus, I've already indicated that we would like to push climate change up the agenda. Indeed, it's going up our members' agendas. So we've already identified climate change as one of our 3 key themes for 2020. In January this year, our Audit and Risk magazine was dedicated to climate change. We published technical guidance to support the profession, and we weave climate change into our events programme. But as I say, we want to push it up the agenda even further and share best practice internal audit in this area. So this is why we're currently working in partnership with yourselves, the Climate Group, on a thought leadership project called Organisations Preparedness for Climate Change and Internal Audit Perspective. And this will be launched in November. And it will be based upon a survey of chief audit executives in the UK and Ireland. And it will help us better understand organisations' readiness to climate change, as well as what internal audit is currently doing to support the organisations they serve to identify, manage and mitigate climate change risks and opportunities. And the report will also have a number of case studies of internal audit functions who've done innovative work around climate change. And the preliminary results of the survey show that internal audit is not where we'd like the profession to be. There's, as I said earlier, there's too many internal audit functions reporting doing limited or no work on climate change, and we'd like to see more chief audit executives proactively engaging with their audit committees on climate change. So it's clear that our profession needs more support and professional guidance about how to approach and audit this area, and we'll continue to build our professional guidance and build on the guidance we've already created. And the key thing here is to ensure our members have the knowledge necessary to provide an assurance around their organisation's preparedness for the climate change agenda. So we need to equip internal auditors with the insights, information and skills they need to audit climate change properly. And this is why the report in collaboration with yourselves is very important. It's not just the launch of a new report, but a launch for a climate change campaign to ensure that we can play a critical role in the identification, the management and the mitigation of climate change risks. And we're also looking, it's not just risk, it's also opportunity. And there's an important role of internal audit to highlight the opportunities that climate change presents to the organisations they serve. So not just risk, but opportunity. And I think that's a key point. So thank you.
Great, John. I'm really glad you made that last one around opportunity. And I guess also to say that I think the dynamic, why this really excited about the research you're doing is one part is it's really good to learn where people are and to be able to share and be transparent about that. The second is that point about what it means for an institute such as yourselves to take a leadership position and visibly say, we're talking about this, we need to think about this as our community. And so it doesn't just come from a bottom up piece, but you're really saying that we know this is going to count, and how are we going to help you shape that agenda? So really encouraging to see that happening. Jonathan, from your side, a different sort of network as have talked about before, are there any lessons about how you can engage effectively with your members that you think would be good to talk about now?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is really, and it's been picked up on by various colleagues, is the peer-to-peer learning. So we have a network of about 100 companies around the world that are kind of leading in this area of integrating the climate risk within their broader management. And what they want to know, it's a highly regulated area. So a lot of companies are quite nervous about going beyond what is compliance or what is the regulation, even when there's a business case. So we provide a safe space for the companies to get together and share best practice internationally on what they're doing, what some of the regulatory barriers might be, how to address those barriers. Could we be the voice with the regulator to help ease those difficulties within different markets and engage with regulators globally and also within countries? We also do provide those kind of practical guides, the how-to. We also, because we take a kind of helicopter view, we bring different parts of the business together. And it's amazing how many organizations are siloed in the way that they're managed. So, you know, we come at it from a reporting and governance perspective, but you can have two teams that are producing the same annual report who've never actually met within the organization. So we forge that dialogue and collaboration within organizations, and we say to them, if you bring together a CFO with a chief sustainability officer within an organization and get them in the same room and say, can you both write down what your business model is? What is your company's business model? What you'll find is that they come up with completely different business models. They're working in exactly the same organization, they're on the same management team, yet they have a completely different understanding about what their organization strategy is. And that comes back to Sharon's point about the integrated thinking. So the first step is to get a common understanding within the business about what the purpose and what the strategy of the organization is, and then forge that kind of dialogue between those two organizations. I also think, you know, we work with other professional bodies, you know, ACCA and other accounting bodies around the world. Training is absolutely critical. We're working with the CFA Institute, the financial analysts, because they provide all the information about the financial reports in the world, to get them to embed climate change within their own training, within their education. ACCA as an accounting professional body has embedded integrated reporting and thinking within their accounting syllabus, the mainstream accounting syllabus. So the next generation of finance professionals, this will just be normal to think about climate risk as part of financial management. And so I think there are lots of ways we can drive collaboration, build capacity, training and education. And they're just some of the ways that we're doing it.
Yeah, super. And that point about connecting people up feels really resonant. I mentioned at the very start the example of Tesco with their commitment around electric vehicles, and thinking of the number of people who need to be involved in that, in terms of those people who've got procurement roles, people who've got roles in a sense for energy management, those who are responsible for the property within the company. This needs to be something that all of those are connecting up, and to be able to do that requires a lot of conversations, people who are very good at making the connections, but undoubtedly a leadership sort of story or vision of why this would matter to be able to make that shift, because then there's a whole bunch of technical stuff to get that to really work together.
Yeah.
Ali, I don't know, as B2B, there's obviously a number of organizations here that you sort of connect with, but many others too. I don't know if there are any lessons that you have about how you're seeing membership organizations taking a strategic approach, or an approach that's really bringing together effective ways of connecting with their members that you'd like to share at the moment.
Yeah, no, thanks, Mike. I think a lot of our clients and other membership organisations in the network that we're part of are starting to obviously proactively ask their members more and more what they need in this area, probably focusing more on sustainability than direct climate action, if I'm honest. But they are being more and more proactive. I guess the thing that we're noticing the most about that is it's not integrated, Jonathan. It's still relatively siloed. And I think a lot of the professional membership and trade associations that we are working with don't necessarily know the impact of the carbon impact, positive and negative, and the opportunities surrounding their specific professional or industry. So actually doing much more of a holistic research and insights, and understanding more on the impact of the industry or the profession that they represent first, then obviously asking their members what they actually need from them in order to help them on this journey. Skills is key. People and skills. I think, when Adam listed, obviously with the majority of businesses in the UK being small, being the economic powerhouse, what they need from, in terms of support is all around, and to quote the climate group on this, carbon down, profits up, looking at efficiencies, what the opportunities are, where the innovation sits, where's the opportunity for growth and to engage customers. And, you're talking about the future, the future workforce. Young people want to work in organizations that are ethically sound, that have, sustainable principles, and really strong governance as well. And I think, the role of professional trade associations have there's a massive opportunity for them. And I just want to pick up also on Kevin Bader's question, which I thought was a really good one. Membership organizations, membership bodies are organizations too. They fit within one of these, SME or a large enterprise. Some of them obviously, but much more of them fit within the SME bracket. They, absolutely must get their house in order themselves. They must practice what they preach. But if they're not ready yet, that shouldn't stop them from trying to support their members either. The two things can happen at once through collaboration and obviously better engagement with other professional bodies and other groups, and take really strong learning from other professional bodies, such as those that are already leading and trailblazing in this area. But I think start by asking the members a question: what do you need from us? What type of practical support and guidance, and understanding more, and don't bury their head in the sand, because it's a challenging, scary subject.
Thanks, Ali. It's terrific to hear that insight from across the different groups that you're working with. And I suppose I just reflect, I work for a 100-person not-for-profit organisation which has a lot of people who are very committed to these issues, and we have a lot of debate about whether we're doing enough or how we're doing enough on our own operational, property, travel issues. These are big live debates, and it's really healthy to have those, because you can then see, okay, this is what's difficult, this is where blockers happen, and to be credible doing that, as well as realizing the sense of purpose that comes from that. I want to acknowledge a question also that David Sneesby has helpfully dropped into the chat area, which I think connects very much with this conversation. So people may want to reflect on it, but I think it will the comment is a nice segue, in that he talks about leading by example. Should, for example, London office building lights, including those of members of membership organisations, be turned off at night or limited, especially when workers are being encouraged to work from home? It seems a lot of energy is being wasted unnecessarily, and I think there is an important bit, both symbolically as well as directly, on the energy there that can have. And I think it's an interesting question of how can organisations yourself, which may not be the ones that are directly running the lights in those buildings, start to have influence through your members. And I guess this sort of taps into my point about those leaders in professional bodies who have other roles and other ways of being able to drive influence in the organisations they work with. Like to come on to the last area, which unsurprisingly is a looking forward one. On one level, there's from the world of the climate community, there's an incredibly important next 12 or 15 months in the run up to the UN climate conference in Glasgow. And so big policy issues to be looked at, big issues about how business will take leadership. Equally, to the conversation that Adam started, there's a lot of organisations that are looking how they survive this year, and clearly a very uncertain economic and otherwise business environment. And so as you look at the year ahead and think about these climate issues, what does this mean for the few things that you think are going to be most important to help move forward over the year? And Adam, I know you need to drop off a few minutes early from the call, but so let's just make sure we certainly get your comments in at this point. What's the top priority for the year ahead, I say amidst this rather chaotic world in which your members are operating?
If I think in the area of climate action and in the area of promotion of net zero, I think it's ensuring that the climate change conference in Glasgow is not a missed opportunity for the vast majority of the business community. I think your comment there, Mike, was absolutely right, that there is a group that gets extremely excited about COP26. But I could go to various business communities all across the United Kingdom, outside the city of Glasgow itself, which is very excited about it. And people will look at you blankly and say, what are you talking about? the government has a lot of work to do here to make what is a complex, jargon-laden international conference relevant to the broadest possible sweep of businesses. But all of us have a responsibility, I think, there as well as membership organizations and as associations to say, here's how this could be helpful or beneficial to you and to your business. So I think that is, a major opportunity. What I'd like to start seeing from the organizers is that humanization of COP26, that humanization of the entire intergovernmental climate change agenda. And really, I guess it brings me full circle back to the first point I made, Mike, right towards the beginning of the conversation, which is tone and communication really matter. If we want to get businesses and business people as individuals on board, we've got to learn how to talk to them differently. And a Secretary of State for Business standing up and saying, we're hosting the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow this year, most people will go, yeah, and? So you have to answer the yeah, and question.
Yeah, I think that's right. And what's fascinating for me is, on one level, there really have on certain areas been an incredible uplift in dynamic of public interest in aspects of the climate agenda. The David Attenborough Blue Planet story is, is an obvious one on the plastics issue, which enabled very wide-ranging conversation, and also did change what a lot of companies did because they knew their staff were talking about this issue. And so that became a very practical, specific thing that people felt they could be done and part of a public conversation. I guess there is a challenge, which what does that mean when you look at that broader climate conversation to make that more tangible to many people, because business people are people, and they're living their lives as part of that, rather than some sort of climate automaton or business automaton. So thanks. Language really matters. That's a really good starting point on that. Jonathan, what for you is important? I imagine there's a lot of big conversations about how reporting itself is going to evolve, and the bodies that are professionally working together and collaborating on that. Maybe that's something you would like to address, or there may be another angle of what's most significant for you in this coming year.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually it was interesting, Mark Carney on one of the Climate Week events yesterday was saying that reporting is going to be the big focus for him for COP26, and getting endorsement of a framework that enables finance to take account of climate risk as mainstream is one of the things that he wants to achieve from COP26. And we're certainly working through that the COP26 process, and also the UK hosts the G7 next year as well, which shouldn't be underestimated in terms of the power and influence from an economic standpoint. But I mean, obviously, survival is going to be the main kind of topic of conversation, but also there's this sense of how we build back, and how we, the kind of the mantra of building back better, and now I notice it's building back greener, and this whole sense of there being an opportunity here to incentivize behaviour, to build in a new system that enables companies to almost start from scratch in terms of kind of understanding and calibrating these issues. It reminds me a bit of the globalization debate, that picking up on Adam's point about how this is perceived beyond the true believers, in the sense that everybody understands the importance of kind of globalization and recognizes that it's there. But there is certainly the first iteration of globalization, only a relatively few people seem to benefit from it, and it left behind a lot of people. And what I worry about with the climate debate is that we can't see this just as a risk. Those with the deepest pockets are able to mitigate, and everybody else is just kind of left behind floundering and working out how they deal with it. And there's a huge kind of mess, and the top people just fly away, again, a little bit like the globalization debate. So I think we need to see this as an opportunity, but we need to see it as a shared conversation with all sizes of business in all parts of this country, in the UK, but also around the world. And also look at what is happening in other parts of the world. That we started this conversation on leadership. You look at a country like Singapore. 5 years ago, when I started working in Singapore, they weren't interested in climate change at all as an economy. Now they've got a new government that has literally embedded climate change and sustainability in the strategy of the whole country, and everything is being driven by that one issue. So they're becoming a hub for the whole of Southeast Asia on innovation, how to drive R&D investment and so on. And we need to learn from what is happening and look outwards at what is happening and have those conversations with our regulators and with our governments as well. So let's make sure that everyone's involved in the conversation, and that when we do build back better and greener, that is something that is shared and the benefits of it are shared as well, not just those at the top benefiting from it.
It's very interesting. I suppose that's particularly interesting to hear this comment from a financial sector in which the UK has got a really strong position. Because if you would say, what can the UK do on climate, the leadership within the financial services sector is clearly a really significant part of what we can do as part of global Britain. But I guess if that's just, the sense of how that can be part of a learning and sharing and building systems that work globally rather than just about London's survival / preeminence will be one that makes the real change there. So yeah, I think this sector is going to be a vital one that many of you are working in. Sharon, for you at the ACCA, what's your priority for the year? What's the conversation you want to have with members?
I think actually coming sort of in between what Adam has talked about and Jonathan is really where our space really should sit. And that's really about enabling that conversation. So supporting the drive towards coherent, comprehensive accounting reporting that our members can use, but using it in a realistic way. And that means not just broadcasting, but making it real. So therefore thinking about building those relationships, training, and actually rewards. And I'd like to sort of cite a great example, and I know that other jurisdictions are doing similar, but in Vietnam, for example, where what they did was to engage the finance functions across many different organisations to get that conversation going, to understand where those gaps were and train and fill those gaps. And this was in particular around the TCFD, but actually, it can extend much, much further and encourage that adoption, which therefore means that it's encouraging the mindset that's thinking about sustainability and making that connection between science and the scientific literacy that perhaps is lacking, and bringing it to the finance function where it is lacking. And that's really important. And then rewards, recognising that actually small steps do make a difference, and celebrating that, I think, is incredibly important. So those will be things through training our members in those areas to have those conversations in the organisations and the policy setting environments in which they work.
Thanks, Sharon. John, we've had a very rich conversation, which means we have just a few minutes left of our time at the end. It'd be great to hear, though, your final reflections on what the Institute of Internal Auditors is looking to do for this year ahead.
Right, yes, building on Jonathan's comments, we will be engaging with our members, build back better through a climate lens. Building on what Sharon says, we will be looking at our role in the reporting process, looking at the relevance of the data used by our organisations, because we're well placed to provide information about organisations' activities on climate change and manage assurance, help them deliver commitments and meet their targets. And can I just say, as a sort of final point, very much welcome the collaboration with yourselves. I think collaboration is the way forward. It helps maximise impact, maximise reach, and I think it's a way of getting out of the silo approach that Ali mentioned in one of her earlier comments. So thank you very much.
John, what a super comment to finish on. With that, Ali, let me hand over to you, though, for some concluding remarks to this webinar.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mike. Can I just say thank you, Mike? Great conversation. Really, really valuable. I know that we've touched on a lot of points, and I know that a lot of listeners will probably be thinking, what's next? I think the really important takeaways from this is that there's a lot already happening. Membership and trade associations are already doing some great work in terms of collaborating with each other, in terms of the Green Finance Institute and the frameworks that we've just been discussed. I think it's really exciting. I think picking up on Adam's point, and I know that he's left, is this, the how-to message, how to bring this down to the individual sectoral professional associations and institutes are looking at how to go about implementing change and action. So I'll be looking forward to our next range of discussions to talk more practically on how to instill action as well. Thank you everyone for your time. It's been really, really interesting, and thank you for listening to all of our delegates that have tuned in today. I know that you've got a lot on your plate, and Mike, I know that you'll probably be jumping soon onto the next Climate Week seminar that you're running this afternoon. So thank you very much for helping chair this session. It's been really valuable.
You're welcome. It's been very interesting. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.